Okay, good morning and welcome to Mishna Yomi. Today we're learning Sheviis, Parak Vav, Mishnah is Beis and Gimel. We're going to talk about Syria. I think it's pretty much clear. It's Syria. Osam Vitalish with Syria. Avalov Mechubar. Syria is obviously outside of Eretz Yisrael. David, the Gemara says, Kovesh Syria. In one of his wars and his battles, conquest of Eretz Yisrael, he conquered Syria. The Gemara says that kibush yakid lo shmei kibush. The halacha is machlokas in the Gemara. If someone is kovish something on his own accord, a king of Israel, it wasn't have the haskama of all Sanhedrin maybe. It's not considered part of Eretz Yisrael. It's not considered technically part of Eretz Yisrael. It's Syria. The Chazal didn't want people to go live there, so technically there's no kedusha shmita over there. So osim v'tolish b'Syria. The halacha, the real halacha midorai says you could do things, for example, put piles together of fruits and, dorech, disha, dash, to thresh the grains and to remove the chaff, a thing that's already cut, tolish, it was already cut from the ground. But not mechubar, you can't start plucking grapes off the vines or cutting down wheat. They made this gezeira, even though technically there's no problem at all of doing this, even if it's meshuma, or even if people are not mafkir their fields in Syria. They don't allow people to come, which is an usher to do on Shemitah, and it makes isurim to work that land or to harvest that land if you're a meshumar, if it's kept private. In Syria, there's no problem with that. There goes to Rabbanon to actually pluck grapes off the vine and things like that, because mechubar, when it's attached to the ground, because they don't want people to go live in Syria during Shemitah year, it's more convenient to live in Syria where there's no Isra Shemitah. They wanted to make some Isra. Dashim, Vizorin, Vidarkin, Mamarin, Avalo Kosher, and you can do all these things. You can thresh Vizorin, you can winnow, Vidarkin, you can step on the grapes, Mamarin, you can make piles. But Avalo Kosher and Laboshim, the most you can't pick grapes or olives or cut down wheat. Rabbi Kiva made it very simple for you. Things that's similar to that are mutter in Eretz Yisrael, meaning the things that talish, which are mutter in Eretz Yisrael, Osanos of Syria, right? Certain things that would be mutter in Eretz Yisrael. For example, in Eretz Yisrael, if the area is not shomer, it's mufkar. It's shomer. If the area is shomer, this is going to be my chiddush. I'm going to explain more in Iyun Ben Sion in the Iyun part. We're talking about where it's shomer, where people kept their fields private, which you're not really allowed to do in Eretz Yisrael. But you are allowed, even if it's shomer, if somehow the grain or the grapes were plucked off the vine or harvested from the ground, you are allowed to make them into piles. Even in Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to pluck them, minah shomer. So that technically is mutter in Eretz Yisrael. Also the Syria, you could do that in Syria, even the Chalchila. Meaning basically, just like you can pluck minah shomer in Eretz Yisrael, you could also pluck minah shomer in Syria also. Mechubar, just like, and then basically the Gemara is saying that just like there's a heter to do that, in Eretz Yisrael, the same heter applies in Syria. Basically, the halacha is basically the same. Minah shomer, we're talking about fields that are guarded. You can only make into piles, and continue the process of processing it, but you can't start processing it in Meshomer, both in Syria and in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael midoraisa, in Syria midorabanan. The Gemara says Gimel mitzalim sheyardu aleim ushamim v'simchu. Let's say you have onions. So rain, they were planted during the 6th year, and they continued to go into the 7th year. They weren't plucked in the 6th year. They're in the field in the 7th year. And now it rained during the rainy season in the 7th year, and they started to grow extra layers, became bigger, the onions. Im hayu alin lehem shchorim, if they were black color, dark color, the new leaves of the onion asurin, then you can't benefit from that, even though technically it was grown during the 6th year, most of it, but because there's a tosefes that was grown during the 7th year, which is actual tosefes that is edible, so therefore the Isser of Sheviis, even though normally say batal barov, and most of it grew during the 6th year, and only a meat is Asr, but because it's davar chashuv, it's the Rakashav Shemitah is an Isra Chashav, so therefore we don't go about after Rov Horiku. Let's say these extra leaves were green and sullen and didn't look good, they weren't healthy. Harei Elim Mutarim, they're not considered significant, therefore it's about the Rov. Rabbi Kiva Chanina ben Antigonus Omer, Micholi Talish Ba'alin Shahem Asurim, connected became mostly Sheviis Mutar. And he says, I'm going to explain according to the Rambam, if you try to pluck the onion, a different way of assessing the growth, if you try to pluck the onion out by these new leaves, and the leaves rip off, so he says it's still going to be aser, because Shemitah, because it's not like Horiku, it's not like it became green and sullen. They're black. We're talking about. They have a good color. It's just they're not strong enough. That still is not batal l'rov because it's chashuv. Mostly Sheviis mutar. Mostly Sheviis, you have these type of leaves where somewhere in between black and somewhere in between sullen leaves. So he says on mostly Sheviis, it was planted during the 7th year of Isser, or somehow it got planted during the 7th year. Most of it grew during the 7th year, and a little bit grew into the 8th year. So therefore, they're mutarin. Because we're talking about these leaves that came off, because the leaves grew during the 8th year, so they're not part of it. They're not part of the onion. So therefore, those leaves on Shemitah are also because they grew during Shemitah. On Shminis, they're mutter because they're considered separate from the onion itself, and they grew during the Shemitah. So it's not called a situation about the road. They're separate from the onion, the main onion, and that would be the explanation of the Mishnah. Hope you enjoyed seeing it on Mishnah coming up right now.